Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe. Hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. If you are tuning in live here on Behance, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. Got Cornell and Solomon, Farine, Wade, Rob and Katie, Fergie, great to see you, Rebecca, and Tiana, and Tomas, Megan, Cody, and you're right, Megan. It's your message just disappeared, but it's hockey season finally. So we're going to have some nice battles this year. I'm excited for that. Solomon from Egypt, and I saw Katie from Russia. Great to see. Hey, Jesse, great to see you as well. Awesome. Happy October. It's officially the best month of the year, and there's no arguing about that. Not only is it Halloween in a few weeks, but Adobe Max is coming up in about 26 days. And speaking of Adobe Max, max.adobe.com. Head over there if you haven't yet. Max is free this year again, and completely virtual, which is wonderful, all staying safe. And we have over 400 sessions, including my session, What's New in Adobe XD. We've got some fun stuff coming up, not just at Max, but in the months and year to come as well. Very quickly, what's new in Adobe XD? Definitely go register for that session. Got a lot of people registered already, and everything's been pretty much submitted. It's in review. It's going to be a good time. Hope you're all excited. I certainly am. I can't wait to show you all the goodies that we have in store. All right, so let's hop over to Adobe XD, and we're going to be continuing on with the gaming platform that we started just a few weeks ago. We had last week off, I believe, and then the previous 2 weeks, we started building out this experience, and we're going to continue this throughout Max as well, I believe. Might mix it up here and there, but it's been a fun project. And if you do want to start following along and start from scratch, and you don't necessarily want to watch these live streams because they're very full of, me talking about hockey and aliens and weird stuff like that. On YouTube, I just started uploading more condensed versions of this experience. So I just uploaded yesterday part 1, which is basically just blocking out the experience, kind of like what we did in the first masterclass. Hey, Julia and Sam, great to see you both, and Rob from Saskatchewan. I haven't been to Saskatchewan yet, but one day I'll make it out there. So yeah, youtube.com/Howard Pinsky. You can start watching that series. I'm aiming for video number 2 mid next week sometime. We're currently having a lot of construction at the house. Our basement's being finished, and my new studio is going to be down there, which is exciting, but there's lots of noise. So if you hear banging from time to time, that's what it is. All right, so we're going to get going. Just to recap very quickly, over the last 2 sessions, masterclasses, we built out this, which is pretty good for 2 masterclasses, and we have a few interactive components here. So this featured section at the top, we can click through to go to the different images like this, which is great. And we have these lovely gradiented active indicators at the bottom, which is fun. We also started to build out the expanded view for this particular image here, which is kind of fun. We might expand on the expanded view a little bit more as time goes on, but we'll see. And then we also built out this navigation bar with a collapsed state and an expanded state. And one thing I want to do before we move on to what we're going to be doing today is just add a little bit of a hover effect in this area here. So if we go ahead and select our navigation bar right here on the left, we do have our hover state. Now, we have to start thinking about, do we want to add the, let's see, Saddam is asking, do the engineers have any plans to add in Scrubby Zoom in XD? Scrubby Zoom. I'm blanking. Let me know what Scrubby Zoom is. There's a lot of ways to zoom in XD. You can hold down your command key and then use your mouse wheel. I'm wondering if you're talking about like the slider that lets you zoom in and out. We do have at the top here, you can zoom by percentages, or you can grab the zoom tool and do it that way. Or if you have a trackpad, you can pinch and zoom. So there's a bunch of different ways, but there's no slider. That might be what you're talking about, but let me know. So we have to start thinking about, do we want to introduce the additional hover effects inside of the hover state or the default state. Now, we're really only going to be seeing those hover effects inside of the hover state. So we can probably just add it right there. So I'm going to dive in here. And what I like to do for things like this, just to make it a little bit simpler, Scrubby Zoom in Photoshop available. I'm still not sure what Scrubby Zoom is. Maybe I know it by a different term, but if someone can post maybe a picture or something like that, or I don't know. Let me know. I'll take a look. So I'm going to hop in here. Of course, I'm getting a phone call while I'm streaming. Anyways, so I'm going to hop in here. I like creating the hover effects as separate layers. So you're not really building it onto, let's say, the icons or the text, right? You can scroll zooming by holding Option. So that's what you can do. So assuming that that's what Scrubby Zoom is, that's what you can do in XD. So actually you hold down your Command key. So you can scroll like this. However, but you have to use a scroll wheel. So it's a little bit different, if I'm thinking of it correctly. Yeah, so I don't know what I'm saying anymore. I don't know. So it's kind of there, but probably not exactly the way. Definitely go to user voice and upvote it. Okay, so we're going to dive in here into this mask of the navigation bar because we want everything nicely contained. And what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to grab a rectangle and draw one out right about here. And if I drop the opacity a little bit, we can see the layer underneath. We want to make sure it's in the center. I'm going to make sure it's about the same. So let's go for 12 and 12 as well. Scrubby Zoom is when you select the zoom tool and hold the left mouse button. Okay, got it. Yes, I've got it. Not available. But that would be nice. Like I said, there are a lot of different zooming options in XD. Team hasn't been able to get to every one of them because there are lots of things that they want to prioritize. But definitely upvote it. If there's enough, then they'll definitely tackle that. All right, so what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and move this behind our links. And we're going to set it up for what it's going to look like when it's hovered upon. So we'll do something like, because we're using a background blur, we may want to use something like a blend mode. So maybe soft light, something like this, add a nice bit of contrast in there. Maybe we'll round out the corners a touch, just a little. We don't want to go too much because then it looks a bit strange, especially with the sharp edges on both sides. So maybe about 8 pixels looks pretty good, right about there. And then now that we have this in place, we want to create the actual component and hover effect. So I'm going to press the plus button to the right within the Properties Inspector to create a component. Now you're noticing at the bottom that this component was created as an instance. And the reason that happened is because this component is inside of a larger component. And we made this change, I believe, at last Adobe Max, possibly. And it was because we heard so many users, when they create a component inside of a larger component, they don't want that to be the main component, because that messes with a lot of things. So we're going to right click on it and then edit main component. There it is. So the default state is actually going to be nothing. So we're just going to select the rectangle, drop the opacity to 0. Now you don't want to simply hide the layer within your layers panel, because that will essentially deactivate that layer, which will make it basically impossible for the hover effect to take place, because there's nothing to detect your cursor or your pointer going on top of it. So you want to make sure that the opacity is set down to 0. And then if we go ahead and create a hover state, we'll dive in here and bump the opacity back up to 100%. Now, like I've shown in previous masterclasses and tutorials, when hover states are wired up, they're automatically wired with auto animate. Now in this case, there's nothing to really animate. So I'm just simply going to switch into prototype mode, change it to transition with no animation. That way, when we do create our hovers, it can just activate very quickly, right? So if I hop back over here, because I edited the main component, we can't see it because the default state is essentially blank. But if I play this, we can now hover over top of it, right? And now what we can do, we can actually go through and either put them into a repeat grid or a stack, or lots of different ways we can do this. But I'll just go ahead and do it like that, hover. And I'm going to go through and set them back to the default state. And I change them to the hover state just so I can see them, Didn't have to do that, but it made it easier to line things up. And now, if I go to our default state on our navigation bar, so that main component, I can now hover, and now hover over these options on the left. So it just makes it a little bit easier to see what exactly you're hovering over top of, right? Perfect. All right, so that is looking pretty good. We're pretty much happy with the way this home screen is looking. We may at some point explore things like, another download interaction down at the bottom and add some additional content down here. But what I do want to get to today is a loading screen and also a sign-in screen that kind of goes before this home screen. So we are working with a 1366 by 768 artboard. So I'm going to grab my artboard tool, shortcut key A, and add another one. And this could be placed before or after, it doesn't really matter. And this one here is going to be our loading screen. So if some of you are familiar with something like Discord or Slack, when you first open up the application, there's a little bit of a loading screen, and some gaming platforms have that as well. So continuing on with our darker theme, what we might want to do is create a bit of a dark background. So under the appearance section, we're going to open our fill, switch over to linear gradient, and maybe we'll add a little bit of color in here as well. That could be fun. So maybe at the top left-hand corner, we might want maybe a nice blue. And then the bottom, we might want purple, something like that. And as we add content on top of this, we may have to go back and make some changes to that, but we're going to see what that looks like. And I'm thinking over top of this particular background, we might want to display, fade it out a little bit, maybe some of the games that are available on this platform. So what we can do is we can actually start exploring maybe a repeat grid. So I'm going to drag one out like this. So there's one of the games there. And if I hop into this Creative Cloud library here, you can also do that inside of Finder as well. I have a bunch of images that will look great here, but I want to add a bunch more of these cells. And I also want them to be a little bit larger than this particular. Let me just snap this to the middle. And I want them to be larger because we're going to have multiple rows and we're also going to rotate them a little bit. So I'm going to make it a little bit larger. So when I rotate it, we don't have some weird gaps around the sides. So I have one cell or one image in place. I'm going to hit the repeat grid button right here at the top. Boop, there we go. And I'm going to pull out a few additional cards going across and also down as well. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 4 times 2 is 8. I don't know, I'm counting all of them. So we have 8 of those. So what we're going to do is inside of this Creative Cloud library, again, you can do it inside of Finder or Explorer. We're just going to select some images. So let's go for this one and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And we're going to drag them all directly into the repeat grid. And these are pretty large images, so it took a second or two, but there we go. And of course, I can hover in between them and adjust the spacing if I need to. Let's try about 8 pixels. There we go. And I can also rotate, just like that, to give it a little bit of style. Now, knowing that I'm going to be having some sort of a container on top of this with our loading information and eventually the sign-in screen, we may not want these images to be completely clear, right? So we may want to experiment with something like a blend mode, maybe overlay, not too bad, or soft light is usually a pretty good one. And now we're starting to see that the background might be a little bit too bright, too vibrant. Solomon's saying the images is a component. So these images are a repeat grid. If this is the images you're talking about, these are part of a repeat grid. And in a way, they kind of act like a component. So if I dive in here and add, let's say a circle, right? It's going to add it to all the others. So it's kind of like an instance in a component, but it's a repeat grid. Rob says, do you worry at all about your RGB profiles to display accurate? So I don't personally, because I don't typically design for clients and real world devices and things like that. I know some people do, but I just keep my monitor and display at sRGB. I know that color profiles and display preferences and things like that I know some of you are looking for that, and definitely on the team's radar. So hopefully we can get to that at some point. But yeah, not available just yet. All right. Or make them semi-transparent. You can definitely do that too. Oh, in the left menu. So these ones here, Solomon, these are images that I licensed from Adobe Stock, and they are in a Creative Cloud library. And when I drag them in, you're going to notice, because they're in a Creative Cloud library, they have a link. And that just means that it's linked to an original source. So if they were created in Photoshop or Illustrator, whatever it might be, I can go back to that application, make changes there, and then it's going to push those changes to my XD project unless I unlink it, which you might want to do if you don't want any changes. All right, Jayla, I have to say I love your content. Thank you, and your streams. I appreciate that. I really do appreciate that. All right, so I'm going to go to this background very quickly and just darken some of these areas. There we go. And once we start adding the content on top, we might revisit that again. That's the fun in designing, or annoyance in designing. You're always going back as you add more stuff. You're realizing that something else is like a domino effect, right? All right. So on top of this, we want our container that's going to house the sign-in screen, the loading screen, all that fun stuff. So I'm going to grab the good old rectangle tool, draw one out. And maybe I'll round out the corners just a little bit. We don't want to go too much, but we want a nice playful look, somewhere around 24. And again, because we're going for more of a darker feel to this application, can we remove spacing between images? Yes, so let me hide this. So if you're in a repeat grid, you can actually go all the way to 0, or you can actually go negative in a repeat grid. So you can have your images overlapping if you want as well. So you can remove the spacing, or you can go into the negative or add spacing just by hovering over top. Can you use licensed images if you have no internet connection? Yes, I believe you can. I was going to say I can turn off my internet and see, but that would not be good for the stream. But as long as they're loaded already into your Creative Cloud library, I believe you can. But that's a good question. I'm going to try that out later. I haven't actually done that. I'm always connected to the internet. All right, so we're going for the darker theme. So I'm going to hop into the fill and let's set another gradient. Do we want to? We may not need a gradient, but let's try it out. So we'll go for the top color might be a little bit lighter, and the bottom color will be a little bit darker, somewhere in this area here. Maybe we'll add a. There we go. There we go. All right. And I might want to add a little bit of a border around the outside of this shape. So I'm going to go ahead and set a white border. And I usually do this on darker shapes. I set a pure white border, and then I drop the opacity. And that will allow some of the color of the shape below it, whether it's black or blue or gray or purple, whatever, to kind of come through the border. So it has a nice feel to it. There we go. And then we can possibly experiment with something like a background blur. I don't know if I would do it in this case. Definitely wouldn't do that, right? But I would bump up the blur amount all the way to 50. I would probably drop this to 0, and then so I can bring back some of the color in the original shape, I can increase the effect opacity at the bottom. So I want a very subtle background blur, right? Very, very subtle. It might be hard to see on the stream, and it might be kind of pixelated and depending on your internet connection, but there's a very subtle background blur there. And then I can put a bit of a drop shadow just to separate it from the background a little bit. Just to give a little bit of depth to this design. Now, I will mention that if you're adding a background blur to an object that has, if you're adding a drop shadow to an object that has a background blur, that's what I'm trying to say, it may affect it a little bit depending on your effect opacity. And if you have the effect opacity all the way down to 0, you're not going to be able to see the drop shadow at all. So keep that in mind. If images are heavy, do you think it'll make XD file heavy too? So yes. If you bring in full quality images, then it will add to the size of your XD projects. We don't, I believe, compress images only because it's going to potentially ruin some of your projects. If you need like super high quality images, the last thing you would want is for us to compress those images. So we don't compress them, if I'm not mistaken. There are plugins, however, that can reduce the file size for you. So you might want to check that out. All right. So we have our container, and I'm still not completely sold on the background. I think it's a little bit distracting, so I might just drop, like some of you have mentioned, drop the opacity a little bit, just so that this container really stands out on its own. And the drop shadow's looking a little bit too strong. There we go. All right, that could do. Now, you know what? I might want to darken this a little bit. There we go. Okay. Now, on this particular loading screen, we're going to keep this one very simple. One, we might want the logo of this particular platform. And back in my Creative Cloud libraries, I do have the logos that we're going to be using. Now, if I were to drag it directly onto this shape, it's going to mask it in that shape, which we certainly don't want. So I can either drag it onto a blank area or just drag out another rectangle and boop, pop it into place. And I can always double click or adjust like that. There we go. And then again, if you're familiar with Discord, you might, hey Trevor, great to see you coming over. Yeah, so anyone else is watching on YouTube, head on over to behance.net/Adobe Live so I can see your chat. Hey Lydia, great to see you. All right, so yeah, again, on Discord, they have, you know, these fun sayings as the actual platform is loading. So if I just grab my text tool shortcut key T, I can type out something like warming up the leftover pizza, right? Something fun like that. That'll just kind of display here as the experience is loading. And in terms of the typefaces, we're going to probably keep this fairly simple. Something like Museo Sans is a pretty nice typeface. 900 possibly. And then the color, I might want to keep it fairly light so that it's visible, but I might also want to introduce a little bit of blue just so it blends in a little bit with the rest of the colors, right? If you were to go gray, let me zoom in on here. So it's a very subtle difference. And again, you might not be able to see it in the stream, but this one is gray, and then this is slightly blue, right? It's the same, basically the same color, but with a little bit of blue in it. And it just kind of, it adds to the aesthetic of the design. Now, you don't want to go overboard because then it's going to look a little bit strange and it's going to blend in too much and cause some accessibility problems. So something like this could look pretty good. And then maybe at the bottom, I just might want maybe the version number, because usually you have some sort of a version number or something at the bottom, right? So game on version, let's say 45.0. And this one, I'll drop down a little bit. Might be a bit too small, actually. That could work. All right. Now, one thing we can do is, even though we don't necessarily have time triggers for components at the moment, definitely something the team is working on, but we can create a cycle of different sayings that we might want. And you know, if anyone in the chat has suggestions, hey Hassan, great to see you, for fun sayings that could cycle in this process, let me know in the chat. But what we can do here is, on this text layer, we can go in here and press return. And let's see, trying to think back to my gaming days, what things I did while I was waiting for stuff. Grabbing another Mountain Dew. Can I say that here? Am I going to get copyright struck in or something? I don't know. Grabbing another Mountain Dew, and then we want one more saying. Maybe I'll wait for all of you to give me another saying. While I'm doing that, if I go ahead, these are looking a little bit squishy. I'm going to bump up the line height a little bit inside of the Properties Inspector. But of course, I don't want all of these sayings to be displayed initially. So what we're going to do is we're going to mask out everything but the active saying or phrase, right? So we're going to grab the rectangle tool, shortcut key R, and I'm going to draw out a rectangle across the first one, making sure that it's long enough that all of the other ones will fit in there, right? And with that done, I'm going to select. So I have the rectangle that I just drew out selected. I'm also going to select that text layer. And then under the object menu, we're going to go mask with shape. There we go. So it's going to hide everything outside of that rectangle. But if we double click in it, we can still access it. And Sam says bathroom break. Sure, let's run with that. Right, so we have 2 additional sayings inside of this particular mask, which is nice. But the question is, how do we actually cycle between these as the loading screen is, well, loading, right? There are a few ways we can do it. We can create a component and use something like our keyboard. We can use a tap trigger, our keys, our game pads, things like that. We can also use multiple artboards, which isn't necessarily ideal. The ideal situation is time triggers for components, which, again, the team is working on, but not ready just yet. But let's go ahead and create a component. And what we want to do is transition to the next state, which we haven't done yet. So we have to create a new state. And this will be, I'll just name this 2. I'm going to dive in here and just grab this text layer and move it on up so we can see that second one. And then we're going to press the plus button one more time and move it on up. There we go. Right? So we have default state 2 and 3, and now we want to cycle between them. So if I go into prototype mode, if we do go for the keyboard shortcut or the tap triggers, we can click on this blue handle, and then we want to make sure that we set the trigger in the properties inspector. So in this case, it might be keys and gamepad. Maybe we'll use the down arrow. And we do want auto animate so we can see that animation transitioning to that second state. And we'll choose the second state, and we'll do something simple like ease in, out, maybe 0.6 seconds. And if we take a quick look, press down, there we go, right? So we're going to do the exact same thing for state number 2. Going to state number 3, we'll use our down arrow. And then from state number 3, we can continue that process, but we haven't done the sign-in screen yet. So eventually we'll transition from this screen to our sign-in screen. Why isn't there a way to use time trigger with components? So like I mentioned, Hossam, that's something the team is very actively working on. And Jonathan Pimento on Twitter at some point this year said, we're hoping to get it out this year. Don't know if that's going to happen because it's a very large, complicated project, but trust me, it's very actively in the works. And when it's ready, it's ready. We're not going to rush these things out. We want to make sure it's a good experience, but it's in the works, and when it's available, I will absolutely let you know. I can't wait for it to be available, but I will let you know. All right, so we've got our loading screen looking pretty good. Very simple, right? We're keeping it simple. But the next screen, if I go ahead and let's actually duplicate this over. The next screen over here is going to be our sign-in screen, and this is going to have quite a bit more information than our loading screen. So because of that, I may want to condense this logo. So instead of this longer game on logo, I might want to go back to just this logo right here, right? And maybe I'll position it towards the top. And knowing I'm going to need a lot more room, I'm going to make this a little bit larger. Move that on up. Move that down. And now we have quite a bit more room that we can utilize for our sign-in experience. Now, thinking about that sign-in experience, there might be a way to sign in with your email and password, right? But there also might be a way to sign in with various social networks. In the real world, it might be Facebook and Twitter and maybe Behance and things like that. And then there might be a button to actually sign up. Did you make the logo? I did not. I licensed, I don't have it anywhere here, but I licensed a text, what is it called? A template from Adobe stock, and I just changed the name. But probably could make this logo. Probably could make something pretty similar in XD, either using 3D transforms or, I don't know, maybe we'll explore that one day. We'll see. All right, so what we're going to do is the first thing we want to kick off by letting people know what the service is or what they have to do on this screen. So with the text tool, I'm going to drag out a container. That way we're defining the width. So when it gets to the end, it'll automatically go to the next line. Then we'll type out something like sign into or game on. Right? You can probably hear my clickety-clackety keyboard. is there a way to animate the pictures in the background? So Gabriel, what you could do is you can have two separate artboards and you can essentially just move them, have them on the left on one and on the right on the other, and you can kind of have them kind of transition very slowly. So that's something you could do. There are lots of ways you can potentially do it. Again, you can do that with keyboard. Ideally, like I mentioned, when component states supports time triggers, that will be very easy to do, right? But we're not there just yet. All right, so I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. It's a bit too big. I might want to drop the weight a little bit. Let's bump up the color because we definitely want people to read this. Maybe there we go. Perfect. And the line height, I'm going to bring down just a little bit. There we go. All right. A little bit of a blurb just so users know exactly what they have to do on this screen. It should be apparent, but you never know, right? Now down here, it's essentially going to be separated into two sections. So this section here is going to be to sign in with your email and password. And then this section over here is going to be our social networks. So we're going to start off by creating our first text field. So I'm going to drag out our first box like that. Maybe I'll round out the corners just a little bit. You don't want to go too much. And you probably also don't want to go completely rounded because then it almost looks like a button. For text fields, you want to keep them very subtle. 8 pixels is probably the most I would go in this situation. There might be situations where you might want to go a little bit more, but I'm going to stick with that. And color-wise, we want it to blend in a little bit, but not too much. So something like this, maybe I'll bring, there we go. And then similar to what we did on the background container, I'm going to add a border, white, and then drop the opacity just so it's nice and subtle. There we go. I'm thinking this background might be a little bit too bright. So I'm actually going to go through, let me switch it over to a solid color just to make my life a little bit, there we go. And we still have that background blur, right? So it's very subtle. So it's still bringing in some of that color. So we might not necessarily need that gradient. And now that I've changed this, because I did not use a component for this particular element, I'm going to just copy it to my clipboard, hop over here, right click, and then paste appearance. Now, if I was a good designer and I used the component, then it would just update if I edited the main component, right? But bad me. All right, so inside of this text field, we want essentially two things. We want an icon so that people know what this field is for, and then some placeholder text. Now, for icons, you can go ahead and hop into your plugins panel and use something like icons for design and type in maybe email, and you have some envelopes and things like that you can use. Or I do have Nucleo, which is a third-party icon manager, and it's what I use to just load in all my icons that I have access to. So if I go here and look up something like email or mail, what was it again? Envelope or message. I know it was something. There we go. So there's a little envelope here that we can use. I can copy it to my clipboard, pop it in here, and we will brighten the color a little bit so it's visible. And then in terms of the text, Pinsky at boop.com. I think it's 5 O's. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Oh, it's 4. Okay. There we go. Pinsky at boop.com. It's an actual thing. Not the email address, but boop.com. I think it's right. Let me see. Boop.com. Or is it 5? I don't remember these things. Nope, it's not that. It's 5 O's. I don't know why I do these things, but it's fun. Whoops. 5 O's. There we go. I'm going to make sure to left align it. And because this is placeholder text, or it's text you enter in a text field, we want to keep the weight somewhere around regular. Now, this particular typeface, the weights are 100, 300, 500, 700, 900. A little bit confusing, but somewhere around 500 or 300 should work. And I'm going to drop the size a little bit. That could do. Might be a little bit too dark. There we go. And as I'm going through this process, it's a good idea to hop into your document assets and just start saving some of these colors and character styles, right? So you can just go ahead and select some of these. There we go. Perfect. All right, that's definitely not lining up very nicely. I think this text feels a little bit too thick. Bring that down a touch. Let's go for about 58. All right. So I think I just updated Cornell saying I may be wrong, but I see 4 O's. There were 4 O's, and now it's 5. There we go. All right, so we have our first text field, and you know what? I think the rounded corners are still a little bit too round, so I'm gonna just bump it up to about 4. There we go. So we have our first text field, and what we might wanna do now is create a component from this, just so that we can very easily make changes to our main component, and it's gonna push those changes, like the rounded corners, right? It'll push the changes to all of them. So I'm going to select all these elements here, component, call this text field, and now I can actually go ahead and add another one right below. Now, to make my life a little bit easier, just in case I want to rearrange some of these, it's unlikely I would rearrange the email and password field. I can place these into a group, call this sign in, and then turn a stack on in the properties inspector. This will allow me to define the stack. Now, if there were multiple groups inside of this, it would determine the stack automatically, whether it's horizontal or vertical. But I just switched it over to vertical, and now I can just simply duplicate this, and I can very easily rearrange these if I need to. So now this one is going to be for the password. So I can just enter a bunch of, let's say, dots like that. And I do want to replace this particular icon. So I'm going to hop back over here, and let's find a lock. That could work. Where did it go? Did I not copy it? There we go. I think I pasted it somewhere else. And then also, usually on some password fields, there's the option to make the password visible, right? So in that case, it would be something like an I. Maybe this little guy here. I'm going to copy that. Pop that on this side here, about 16 from the right. Maybe I'll make this a little, whoops, and turn off responsive resize. It is a vector shape, so it's definitely affected by responsive resize. And there we go. I'm not a big fan of the colors here. I might want to introduce a little bit of blue, and that's a nice thing about working with components. I can easily dive in here and then just shift this over a touch just to add a little bit of blue, and you're going to notice it also adds it, not that much blue, but it's also going to add it to all the instances, which is great. All right, so we have our password, we have our email, and we have our password. And then right below, we may also want the actual sign in button. So once you've filled out your email and your password, you'll have a button right down below to fill that in. Now, I'm going to make sure I'm inside of this stack, draw out another rectangle. And of course, I could use a similar shape, but because this is specific to our email fields or our fields in general, I'm going to create this a little bit separately. But we're going to keep it fairly consistent. So this shape here is going to be 16. Whoops, not 16. 4 for the rounded corners. And earlier or last week we started to explore this gradient, and we used it on right over here. We may want to bring that in for the sign in button. Might be a bit too much, we'll see. But I'm going to go ahead and add this color to my document assets. Apply it here, and I want to make sure that it is horizontal. It's quite a strong button, right? So I don't know, we'll see. We'll see what that looks like. And then on top of this, we'll just type out something like sign in. Now, you might see this from time to time. You're inside of a stack. You want to type something on top of a button. and it just pops it up there. It's actually doing exactly what a stack should be doing. It's placing new objects in between existing objects, right? So you can move them around and stuff like that. But in this case, we don't want that. So what we're going to do, we want to make sure that this shape here is inside of a group. So Command and Control G, I'll name this button. And then inside of this group, now we can go ahead and type out sign in. And we'll change the color to white. This is a call to action, so we'll bump it up to either 700 or maybe even 900, make it nice and bold. And I might want to bump up the size a little bit as well. 16, 18 might be too big. Yeah, I think so. So let's go down to about 16 and make sure it's centered. There we go. I think these are still a little bit too bulky. So I'm going to drop this to about, let's go for 48 maybe. And this one as well. There we go, and maybe, I don't know. We'll see. All right, so we have that in place. And then one more thing we might want to add is, I don't know about you, but I forget my passwords all the time. So we want some sort of a link that allows a user to recover their password. And there are many places we can put it, including right underneath the password field, but it might break up that, it just might break up the flow, right? We have field, button. And if we put something in between here, like forgot password, even if we make it nice and small and drop the weight, add an underline maybe make it even smaller, it's still kind of, it feels weird, right? If you take a look at it, it feels strange. So you can probably get away with just having it underneath the button, because it's still in close enough proximity to the password field that users will be able to find it, right? That's probably not going to do. That could work. Maybe I'll bump this up a little bit in weight. Okay, we'll run with that. We'll see what that looks like eventually as things come together. Now, over to the right, like I mentioned, we may want to include the ability to sign in with some of your social networks that you might be on. So what we can do is we can actually duplicate this over to the right. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to use the same text field components, right? Because they're not really fields, they're more buttons. So the styles can be very different. The text might be a little bit different. Some things may share some common elements, right? So I think what we might want to do is just ungroup this so we have those elements there. Let me put this into a group first, just so it doesn't get affected by the stack. There we go. Now, because this is a button, maybe try align right. Yes, we can definitely do that as well. So if we hop in here, we can either put it there or up here. But I still feel that if it's there, I mean, it's not terrible. It's not bad, right? It still kind of breaks up that flow a little bit, and personally, it bothers me. It may be fine to everyone else, but it bothers me a little bit. But I'll revisit that at some point. Right, so because this one is not a field, this is a button, we definitely want to switch up the style a little bit, just so that users don't get a little bit confused. So in this case, we might want to dive in here. And maybe we will darken this even more. Something like that. And then this could be like something like sign in with Gamebook. And then the icon would be whatever that logo is for that particular service. Now, just for the sake of time, I'll just simply add a little bit of a circle. Something like that. And then we can either turn this into a component, maybe button sign network, maybe. component, and then we can duplicate and duplicate. So there might be maybe 3 different networks that you can sign in with. So this one might be, let's say, Pwn Book or Pwn Talk, kind of like TikTok. I'm not very original with these things. Gamegram, Instagram? No, probably not. Maybe in the chat, maybe some of you have better ideas. You probably do. Of gaming networks that are kind of like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and things like that. Trying to get creative with it, but it's clearly not working. All right. Sam says, can pop up if you type the wrong password wrong so it doesn't. That's an option too. Definitely something you can do. All right. Perfect. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we also want, maybe someone lands on the screen and they don't necessarily have any of these accounts. Maybe they haven't created an account with Game On. They don't have any of these on the right-hand side. So they want to sign up. So what we can do is down here at the bottom, we can add a nice large button. Something like this. Maybe I'll actually copy the style here. Paste it. Oops. Actually copy the text as well. And then we can do something like, don't have an account, sign up. And what we could do is we can actually make maybe this one a little bit more bold and a little bit lighter as well. So it's kind of clear that there's a link there. And we can also underline it as well. There we go. Hopefully you're not here. Oh, you're probably all hearing that banging downstairs. That is our basement being done. All right. Playgram, game chat, lobby book. So Lydia's saying, what's the best setting to export screens? I get a little fuzzy images. Lydia, so I'm going to delay that question until Adobe Max. That's all I'm going to say. No, but I think I can probably get away with talking about this. One of the things that the team is actively working on is more streamlined and improved export workflows. So, things that may have been a little bit fuzzy or pixelated previously, or in this version here that we're working on, that will likely improve in the near future. That's probably the only thing I can talk about that's coming potentially at Adobe Max. Otherwise, people will not be happy with. But that's, it's a fairly minor feature. Very important, but fairly minor. But the team is actively working on improvements to exporting. All right, so things are coming along. I'm going to make sure to group this. Button sign up. There we go. And I think that would probably complete our sign-in screen. Let me just move this down a little bit. Perfect. So, if we go back to this screen here, you might remember that component that we created earlier with the default state, number 2, number 3, right? What we can do is we can add another one, and instead of, use our down arrow, instead of going to another state, we can actually go to, let's say I should name it properly, sign in, and go to our sign in screen, right? And sign in. So now, and we don't need auto animate probably, so we're going to do a simple transition. Maybe we'll do a bit of a dissolve. That might be a bit too long. Actually, that's the wrong one. From number 3, transition, dissolve. All right. So down arrow, and view, sign in, right? There we go. All right. I noticed the pixel of XD are different when you're coding. Pixel of XD. I'm not sure what the pixel of XD is. Let me know exactly where I should be looking for that. And then from here, what we can also do is create an interaction from the sign-in button over to the home screen. So I can grab this, drag it on over. And this one's going to be a simple tap trigger. We don't want any keys or gamepads or anything like that. Transition, dissolve. It's a little bit too long. So let's go for 0.4. It's not bad. You can also experiment with things like, you know, sliding up or something like that, right? Ooh, that's kind of fun. I like that. Or let's try, what does push up look like? They're very similar. I think I'll go slide up. All right, so what we might also want to do is maybe change up this background a little bit. So instead of the carousel of games, we might just want to go for maybe one simple image back there. Maybe this one here. And then soft light possibly. Drop the opacity a little bit. There we go. The pixel of fonts. The pixel of fonts. Still not quite sure. All right, so that's looking pretty good. So now if we're here again, 1, 2, and view. Over there, we have a different image in the background. We have our text field. I'm still not loving the color of it. It's not bad, but I would probably tweak that a little bit. We have our sign in button. It's very bold, it's very bright and vibrant, but I'm kind of digging it. It could work. Forgot password, don't have an account, and sign in. And there we are. All right. If anyone else has suggestions for our loading or sign-in screen, let me know. Actually, one thing we should probably do is at the top left, put a back button to go. No, that doesn't make sense. There's nothing to go back. You're not going to go back to the loading screen. That would be weird. But a close button to maybe quit. So if I go, this is why talking out loud as you're designing sometimes helps, because you might think, okay, put a back button. It's just a thing you do. But then you realize there's nothing back there. So let me grab a close button. Maybe put this up here. 28. Let's go for like 32. And then we'll do one of these colors. Well, that's a bit too dark. That could work, maybe. That way, if you close it, then you're out or whatever. I don't know where you're going to go, but you can close it and go somewhere. Thank you, Nabil. I appreciate that. Oh, Melissa. Oh, okay. So you can never catch the difference. So, okay, let me show you. So there is a difference. So slide up. Let me go to prototype mode right here. So slide up, what you're going to notice, let me explain it first, then I'll show you in slow motion. Slide up is going to, the artboard, the transitioned artboard, so this one over here, this home artboard, is going to slightly overlap the artboard is transitioning from. Whereas push up, they're both going to go at the same speed and they're going to line up, right? So if I change this to 5 seconds, this is slide up, so there's going to be a little bit of overlap, right? So if I click on this, watch the overlap, right? So the one at the bottom is moving faster, so it's overlapping the artboard behind it. Where if I go to push up now, they're going to go at the exact same speed as you see here, right? Now, of course, when you do have an interaction that's as quick as we had it before, 0.4 seconds, you might not really notice the difference if you're just kind of glancing at it, right? But that's kind of what it does. So if we did bump it to maybe 0.8, you might see it a little bit better. A little bit of an overlap, and then we have push up, same speed, right? Again, probably won't notice the difference. I hardly ever notice the difference, just like Melissa, but that's what it is. All right, there's no turning back when you choose to create an account. So that's a good call, Cornell. So if there was another screen, if we did design another screen after this don't have an account button is clicked on, then it would make sense if there's a back button to go back to the sign-in screen. But from here, it doesn't make sense to go back to something that doesn't exist. Bruce says maybe place the colored sign-in button would work. Maybe place the colored sign button would. Maybe I'm having trouble reading. Sign-in button account so it's centered. Oh, I think you're talking about a sign-in button over here, maybe, possibly. I'm not sure, but we'll see. All right, I think. Make sure that's lined up. And there we go. So one more time, we've got our loading screen, right? Transitions to our sign-in screen. We can click on that, and it goes to our home screen where we have all the interactions that we created over the last 2 weeks. All right, that's going to wrap it up for today. Got a lot covered again. Like I mentioned, I will be uploading more condensed versions of these experiences on YouTube over the coming weeks, leading up to Adobe Max, so definitely stick around for that. Big thank you to everyone who has tuned in today and given suggestions and just hung out and had a good time. Kyle T. Webster is coming up in just a few moments, so stick around for that, and I will see you all next week.